This is my Sony a7RV. It's a full-frame, state-of-the-art 61 megapixel sensor that is regarded as one of the best photographic sensors around at the moment. And this is an 8-year-old Fuji X-E3. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, and on paper, these two don't compare at all. But do they? Yesterday, I went down to the banks of the River Tyne and the beautiful Herd Groyne lighthouse and shot these two cameras side by side. If you're interested in the results, join me today. So I am down here at the Herd Groyne Pier in South Shields. It's a very gloomy, quite chilly and breezy April day. This is one of my favourite places to do this type of shooting because even on a day like this, you've got the extreme contrasts of the bright sky, the dark grey concrete here and the red lighthouse. And it makes for a really good comparison and a real good test of the sensors. Now this is a battle royale, a David versus Goliath. It's a pointless test, isn't it? Or perhaps not. It's easy to look at the stats on paper, but we're in the real world. We're out taking pictures. And what I want to look at is how far apart these two cameras are. It may be that they are an absolute gulf apart, but it might be that they're actually quite close. Is one better than the other? Is one going to have better colour than the other? Is one more clinical than the other? If you saw my recent video about going back to the Fuji ecosystem, you'll understand how much I love the colours from the X-Trans III sensor and the softness of the sharpness, if you like, that I talked about, where the sensor has actually got a sort of soft film-like look to it. The Sony, on the other hand, is pure power, pure clinical image. It's beautiful, but it's very, very digital. So it's going to be a really interesting test. This is not scientific. There's no lasers, there's no optical measuring machines. It's purely two cameras next to each other. We're not looking at the sharpness of the lenses. We've got two completely different lenses. The 24-105 on the Sony and the 23mm on the Fuji. Very, very different lenses. We're going to set a base ISO of 200 because that's the lowest that the Fuji will go. And we're going to shoot at different ISO levels so that we can see what noise is introduced into the image and, more importantly, how well we can get rid of that noise. As I said here, we've got a real high dynamic range, dark concrete, red lighthouse, big expansive bright sky. It's a really, really interesting test of dynamic range. So we will do a whole range of bracketed exposures around the correct exposure, and we'll work off of the Sony's meter and we'll match the exposures across the two. Now, of course, some of you are going to say that apertures won't match, and you're right, and some of you will say that the ISOs won't match, and you're absolutely right. But that's completely against the point of the test. The point of the test is just, as a lot of my tests are, trying these cameras out in the real world and seeing how the images compare to each other. Now, one thing I will be doing, just for the sake of equality, is I'm going to shoot the Sony in APS-C mode. That allows it to drop down to a 26 megapixel cropped part of the sensor. That makes it very, very close to the equivalent Fuji at 24 megapixels. Both APS-C. I will set my 24mm 105 lens to 24, which is about as close as I can get to the 23mm on the Fuji, and that will give us a nice direct comparison. Now, when I finish shooting here, I'm going to take these images back to the studio and drop them into DxO PhotoLab 9. Why not Lightroom, you might ask? Well, I'm sure a lot of you Fuji users are quite aware of the worms issue that you get with certain X-Trans sensors. It's a problem that's been getting better, and Lightroom's enhanced details actually helps out in that situation. However, that problem is still there, and it's been through all the X-Trans sensors. And in areas of great detail, where you try and sharpen things up, these worms become very, very prominent. They don't appear, as far as I can see, in PhotoLab 9. And I will be doing another video in the near future where I look at every X-Trans sensor and see how well they develop compared between Lightroom and PhotoLab 9. And let me know in the comments if you're interested in that video, because I think it's one that I really want to do. I've owned all the X-Trans sensors, so I think it will be a really, really interesting test between those two editing apps. So as I say, I'm matching exposures, I'm matching apertures, I'm matching shutter speeds. It's not scientific, it's real world. I'm going to get into it and do some shooting, and then we'll take those images back and have a look at them. So welcome back to the studio. It was a cold old morning down there on the banks of the Tyne, but I really enjoyed shooting these two cameras side by side. And if you haven't seen the video that I did last week about my love for this little camera, please have a look at it, because I absolutely adore this little camera, and it's just such a joy to use, as are a lot of Fujis. The real test is, how well do these two cameras compare? And on paper, there is absolutely no comparison. This is 8 years newer, it's state of the art, it's a 61 megapixel sensor, it is one of the best sensors around at the moment. They really shouldn't compare. But I've dropped them into DxO PhotoLab 9, and we're going to have a look in detail at the underexposed, the correct exposed, the overexposed, and the high ISO images from these cameras in DxO PhotoLab. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I have a journey with DxO PhotoLab. They reached out to me about 6 months ago and asked if I'd like to look at their software. And I've been transitioning and working between Lightroom and DxO products for the last 6 months. And I'm absolutely loving PhotoLab 9 at the moment. In particular, its denoising tool, DeepPrime, which is absolutely streets ahead of Lightroom as far as I'm concerned. And you'll see, hopefully, that in the video today. So let's get into PhotoLab 9 and have a little look at what we've got and how well these two cameras compare against each other. So this is the photo library module of DxO PhotoLab 9. And as you can see, I've loaded in all the images. Now our two main reference images are here. This is the Fuji in the red and the Sony in the green. Both shot at 200 ISO, both shot at 1/25th of a second at f5.6. And of course there are slight differences between the exposure. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this image over into the customize module. This is the Fuji file. We're in the customized module. We've got the film strip down here. If I go over to the Sony, you can see there's a slight difference in exposure and slight difference in color balance. Now I set the white balance to, I think, 5500 on both cameras. However, they do read color balances very slightly different. So what I'm going to do in each of these particular tests, I'm actually going to do an automatic white color balance off of the white here at the base of the lighthouse. So let's do that first on the Fuji, and we'll go over to the color tab here. We'll get the color picker and we will click there. And as you can see, it becomes a lot more neutral. We'll do exactly the same for the Sony image. We come there and that becomes neutral. Now what I want to do is just match the exposures slightly. So I'm going to bring the Fuji up very slightly in terms of exposure. So we'll go up to the exposure tab here and we'll just slide that up a little bit. And I think that's broadly similar to the Sony. Now what we can do is we can compare them side by side in the DxO PhotoLab customized module. And what we do is we pick the reference image. So we're going to go with the Fuji. We come up here to compare and we say use current image as reference. And now we click on this image here and we can select the image that we want to refer back to. So if I select the Sony one here, we can see we've got the Fuji on the left, the reference image, and we've got the Sony on the right, the color corrected one, and they are broadly similar looking images. The Sony's perhaps slightly darker, but broadly in terms of dynamic range, color, neutral colors look very, very similar. The reds in the Fuji look a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated. Now don't forget the Sony's shooting in APS-C mode, so they are very, very close in terms of size. You're using the cropped part of the sensor on the Sony, so the pixel density is actually significantly higher on the Sony than it is on the Fuji. You'll need to bear that in mind for what we're doing in these tests. So let's come in and have a look at them at 100%. And yes, you can see that definitely the reds of the Fuji are a little bit more prominent, but overall they're very, very similar images. I would say the Sony is a little bit sharper. You can see it in the lighthouse out here. And if we come up to 200%, and again, they look very, very similar. Again, I think the Sony is just a little bit sharper, but we're going back to what I talked about in my previous video when I first started shooting with the Fuji. There's a softness to the sharpness in the sensor of the Fuji, that film-like look. The definition is there, but it's not got that uber sharp clinical look that the Sony has on the right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just do some basic adjustments, the sort of adjustments that anyone would do. We will do them first on the Fuji and then we will match them on the Sony. So let's go back over to this module here. Let's go to the Fuji image and let's go to the exposure tab here. And what we'll do is we'll bring the highlights down to about -50, just to see if we can bring a bit of the definition into that sky. And there we go. And we'll bring the shadows up to around, let's say, 25 there. That's a little bit HDR looking, but it's still a relatively natural looking image. The red's really punching out in this shot. Let's do the same with the Sony. We'll come over, we'll pull those highlights down to -50 and we'll bring those shadows up to around 25. Now we still have our Fuji as the reference image here. So if we go to the side-by-side comparison, select the Sony, and we'll zoom in a little bit at 100%. And again, they're broadly similar. The reds again are still punching out slightly better in the Fuji, but the neutral colours, the greys of this grey sky, this grey old day we had in Tynemouth at the time, was very, very neutral, and it's broadly matching on both. Now I would say we have introduced a little bit of noise into both these images. So if we come up to 200% and come out to the shadow areas of the lighthouse here, you can really see the sharpness, the extra sharpness that the Sony has, but I think it also has a slightly increased amount of noise as well. So that's been a really interesting comparison of two correctly exposed side-by-side images. So let's go back to the main shot and we'll select the Fuji. And now we're going to have a look at the two stops overexposed versions of those files. We'll bring this back to 1:1. And as you can see, this is the Fuji. It's two stops overexposed. First thing I'm going to do is we're going to go over to the color tab and we're just going to correct that white balance to make it a little bit more normal. We are definitely seem to be clipping on the right end of the histogram there, and we have a little bit of wiggle room on the left end of the histogram. So if we go over to the exposure tab here, and I'm going to pull this down to -2. Now, I'm not sure if the exposure slider works in stops or whether it's just a percentage thing. So we'll pull this down and see what we get. Now, that's actually quite a dark image, but you would kind of expect the metered image to be relatively dark anyway because of that vast expanse of sky that we have around it. And let's do the same with the Fuji overexposed image. So we'll come to the Fuji one. We'll correct the white balance first, and then we'll pull this down 2 stops. And there we go. So let's have a little look at these two side by side. Once again, we will set the Fuji as the reference image on the left. So use current image as reference. We will go over to the side by side, and then we will pick the 2-stop overexposed Sony version. And there you go. The Fuji looks a little bit darker. So what we'll do is just bring exposure down slightly on the Sony just to match it. and that's broadly similar. The white balances are a little bit different in this particular overexposed version, but I'm sure, you know, side by side they actually look broadly similar. Perhaps a little bit more detail in the sky on the Fuji, but we'll have a look at that in a minute. The first thing I want to do is see if we've introduced much noise bringing these shadow areas down. Let's go to 200%. And not really. Bringing it back from 2 stops over has not particularly introduced much noise at 200 ISO. The images look broadly similar. Again, there is an extra sharpness to that Sony file that's missing in the Fuji, but I'm sure a lot of you, including me, will say I think the Fuji actually looks slightly more natural, and it goes back to that sort of thing I was talking about, the clinical look of modern digital sensors compared to these older Fuji X-Trans sensors. What I'm going to do is very similar to what we did with the correctly exposed image. We're going to do some basic adjustments to it. We'll start with the Fuji at 2 stops over, and we'll just take that out, and we'll do the same sort of thing. We'll bring the highlights down to about -50. We'll bring the shadows up to about +25, and we'll do the same with the Sony. Let's go to the Sony, highlights down to about -50. Shadows up to around 25. And let's have a look at them side by side. Let's go over to the Fuji and we'll select compare and then select the Sony. And what I'm looking for is to see if we've introduced any further noise to the image, but it doesn't look like we have. Let's come up to 200%. No, they are both very, very clean images. The Sony, as I say, is sharper, but I still feel that the Fuji is more natural looking. So let's go back to full frame here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at 2 stops underexposed. This is the Fuji, 2 stops underexposed, and this is the Sony, 2 stops underexposed. And the thing we're going to do now is look at how much noise is introduced when we try to brighten up an underexposed image. So let's start with the Fuji. We'll raise the exposure first and then we'll correct the color balance. So we'll raise it 2 stops and then we'll correct the color balance. Color picker tool here on the white there. And there we go, quite a nice neutral looking image. Let's go over to the underexposed Sony. We're going to go back to the exposure tab and we're going to bring the exposure up to +2. And we'll do the white balance again, just like that. So let's set the Fuji as the reference image once again. So this is the underexposed version, raised 2 stops. Let's set that as a reference image. There we go. And let's go side by side. And let's have a look at the underexposed Sony. And again, they look broadly similar. I would say there's a little bit more dynamic range available in the Sony looking in the sky there. And again, the reds of the Fuji are punching out a little bit more than they are on the Sony. Let's zoom into 100%. And you can see there is noise. There's more noise in that Sony sensor, and that's to be expected because I think the pixel density is significantly higher in the Sony sensor. Don't forget, pixel density doesn't change because we've gone to APS-C crop mode. It's not using the full sensor and pixel binning. It's actually just cropping from a 26 megapixel area of the center of that sensor. So that pixel density remains the same, and it remains higher than it is on the Fuji. And I've got to say, I think that Fuji image pulled back from 2 stops under looks a more natural looking image. There is noise in it. There's not as much noise in it. And I think it looks more pleasing to the eye. Let's go up to 200%, see how significant that noise is. And you can see really significant noise introduced on the Sony, significantly less on the Fuji. And again, the sharpness of the Sony really shines out here, and maybe that sharpness is exaggerating the noise a little, I don't know. But overall, I think the Fuji's a more pleasing image. So we've got one more thing we're going to have a look at now, and that is these 2 cameras at 12,800 ISO. Now we come back to the point where I was saying the pixel density of the Sony is higher, so I'm very much expecting the Sony to have a significant amount more noise. But the key here is how much we can reduce the noise using DxO's fantastic DeepPrime noise reduction system. I'm absolutely in awe of this system, and I think it's absolutely brilliant for denoising images, significantly better than Lightroom's version, I would say, at the the moment. So we're going to have a look at the Fuji and the Sony side by side at 12,800 ISO just to see how much noise there is. Let's pick the Fuji first. There it is. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep the exposure exactly as it is. We are going to do the white balance correction. There we go. And you can see that's a noisy image. And if we come in at 100%, that's a very, very noisy image. Let's do the same with the Sony. And you can see that's even more noisy. Let's set the white balance out there. Let's go to the exposure tab. And you can see that's really, really noisy. Let's just have a look at them side by side. Let's set the Fuji, as always, as the reference image. Let's go compare. Use current image as reference. And then we'll select the Sony to go side by side. And we'll zoom in to 100% on both of them. And you can see the Sony is significantly more noisy. So let's run DeepPrime on them and let's go back to full frame. Let's select the Fuji first. There we go. We'll go over to the full working tools here and we can scroll down. We've got standard DeepPrime 3 and DeepPrime XD3. XD3 is the most powerful and advanced of the noise reduction systems. This is the Fuji. Let's click XD3 and see what happens. And there you can see a very significant improvement. I mean, it's absolutely gobsmacking what DeepPrime can actually do to an image. At this level, has it smeared the details in the redness and the wood of the lighthouse? Possibly, yes. But let's run the same test on the Fuji and see what we get. Let's go XD3 again. And wow, that is really, really quite impressive. Let's have a look at them side by side. We still have the Fuji as the reference image. So if we go to the side-by-side comparison, we make sure we've got the Sony selected. The Sony's on the right here, the Fuji's on the left here. This is at 100%, and both of them are very, very clean images. Definitely more definition in the Sony file, I would say, at this level. But if we come up to 200%, and you can see we haven't lost the definition in the wood here. It's definitely still there. It's not as prominent as it was in lower ISO images. So the noise reduction has caused a little bit of smearing, but from a 12,800 ISO file, that's pretty amazing. The Sony, however, I think has actually benefited significantly more from the noise reduction. There is still slight amounts of noise in it. We could control that with the luminance and force details sliders over here. But overall, I would say that the DeepPrime has done an absolutely incredible job on both of them, but probably even better on the Sony. So don't forget, I have a 15% discount on DxO products. I will leave the links for those in the description below. I'm absolutely loving using this DxO PhotoLab. I think the noise reduction alone is absolutely fantastic. Plus the fact that with the Fuji files, you don't get the worms. And I will be doing a video later on, perhaps this month, next month, on all 5 generations of the X-Trans sensor in PhotoLab and comparing it to Lightroom to see how significant the worms are in Lightroom and how much better they are in PhotoLab, or non-existent if you like. So there you go. Quite an interesting test. Was the Sony a7RV streets ahead of the Fuji? No. By no means at all. Yes, we're shooting in APS-C sensor mode. Yes, we have a higher pixel density on the Sony. Of course we do. But comparably, I'm going to put my neck out and say that I actually prefer the image look, the aesthetic of the image from that little Fuji camera. Now, of course, if I was shooting sort of large format images that were going to go to print, then the Sony would probably be the tool that I would take every time. If I'm shooting video, of course the Sony will be the tool that I take every time. But if I'm looking to get really nice quality images from a walk around camera, pretty much anything out of high-end work, this is a great little tool. It's been an interesting test, a test that's actually really quite surprised me. At 24, 26 megapixels of these two cameras, there's not that much difference. Combined with denoising and the capabilities of DxO PhotoLab 9, and you can pretty much match these cameras. The Fuji colours, as has always been suggested, are, I think, more natural. The reds are slightly more saturated, but the interesting thing here is if you match the white balances, the neutral colours, the greys and the blacks and the whites of those images were pretty much identical. It's only where you get those areas of colour where they start to differ. So what do you think of this test? Who do you think won in this particular comparison? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be really interested to know what your thoughts are on that. If you've enjoyed the video, a like would be fantastic. A subscription would be even better. And I really look forward to seeing you in the next one.